Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's something creepy that happened in your childhood that still stands out today? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I once woke up in the middle of the night to find a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed whispering my name. It turns out it was just my sister sleepwalking, but the memory still gives me chills. My grandma left us with the woman who lived downstairs when she went to the store. My dad came to pick us up when she was gone, found us with the woman, and lost his shit. I'd never seen him so upset. We waited in the parking lot, and when my grandma returned, he just screamed at her. She seemed nice, and we played with her kids. I could not figure out why my dad was so upset. That woman killed her kids and tried to kill herself something like a year later. I don't know if my dad could smell the evil in her or if something else tipped him off, but he was crazy, and I'm still so thankful for him. When I was little, I was playing outside when a man in a vehicle asked me to come over to him. I lived in a safe neighborhood, so my parents never gave me safe talk, but I did remember watching an episode of the Dexter cartoon where they talked about stranger danger, so I ran away from him. Story times and an incoming wall of text. When I was around 6 years old, we lived in a pretty old 2-story house, 2 stories plus walk-in attic. It was a beautiful century home with a wraparound porch and a second-floor balcony that overlooked a decent-sized backyard. The house was creepy, though, especially for a 6-year-old. It would constantly creak and moan, and I was always told by my parents that it was just a house settling. My older brother liked to scare me, so he convinced me the house was haunted and made up a story about some kid that died in the attic decades before we moved in. The real original, I know. After that, I always swore I could hear footsteps in the attic. It got so bad I couldn't sleep, and then one night, as I was lying in bed, I saw something I will never forget. Staring out into the dark hallway from my bed, I see a tall, dark figure quickly move past my doorway. It wasn't just a shadow, though. It was a person, and it wasn't a person that should be there. It was way taller than my mom, and my dad wasn't home. It scared me so bad that I immediately started to cry, but I couldn't move, call out to my mom, or even wake my brother up, who was right in the top bunk sleeping. I never saw anything else that night, but I'm certain I heard the back door open and close shortly after seeing the shape. My dad worked the third shift, so I eventually convinced myself that he had come home to grab something and then went back to work, and I finally fell asleep. The thing is, I would have heard and seen him walk in the front of my room in the opposite direction first. My room was between my parents' room and the stairs on the second floor, so if he came home and walked to his room, he had to pass my room. I'd been awake all night before and never saw him, so I couldn't have been him. The next day I told my parents, and my dad said he never came home, and they both assured me it was just my imagination. I continued to hear stuff all the time, but never saw anything else. I was terrified of being alone in the house. I insisted to my parents that there was something in the house. My dad ends up getting a job out of state, so we're moving, and my brother has a going-away birthday slumber party about a week before the move. I'm still 6 at this time, and he's 11, so this slumber party is full of a handful of grade school boys doing typical early 90s slumber party shit, like pizza, video games, movies, and scary stories. The only adult is my mom because my dad is at work. I'm trying to be cool in front of the older kids, so I tell my brother to tell his friends the stupid ghost story about the kid that died in our attic. He tells the story, and all his friends are like, "Let's go see the ghost." What have I done? I'm gonna have to go up there with them now. I honestly don't remember ever being in the attic before, as it was unfinished and used only for storage. They convinced my mom to take us up there, and she's playing along with the ghost story fun. She grabs a flashlight and starts leading us up to the attic door. She opens the door and starts slowly walking up the stairs without turning the lights on. Again, just putting on a show for us kids. As soon as she got to the top of the stairs and turned the corner into the actual attic, I heard her say, more like scream, Everyone downstairs and outside now. We practically trip over ourselves, running down 2 flights of stairs and out the back door. My mom is running right behind us and is damn near pushing out of the way from the house and towards the neighbor's house. She's pounding on the neighbor's door until they answer, and she immediately says, "I need to use your phone to call the police." She refuses to tell any of us kids what she saw up there, but when my dad and the cops show up, we hear her tell them. When she got to the top of the stairs and looked into the attic, she saw in the far corner what she described as a squatter spot. A bunch of blankets piled up to make a bed, some clothes, a pair of shoes, and food wrappers everywhere. We didn't stay in the house another night. We rented a motel room and stayed there for the last week we lived in that town before moving to another state. Years later, I finally got the whole story. My parents never had a clue someone was literally living in our attic. They did admit, looking back, that there were things that were strange, but most of it got blamed on other people in the house that they knew about, when in reality, it was all this guy living in the attic. My mom would notice food missing, but assume we kids ate it all. My dad found cigarette butts by the back porch and was livid that my mom was smoking again. I was forever told to make sure I'd flush the toilet because someone would always leave it yellow. The blankets he was using for a bed were just new. My mom had thrown them out months ago. Shit like that. I don't know how long it took to find him, but it turns out the attic dweller was a local guy who was mentally ill and lived with his mom. His mom would constantly lock him out of the house, and this guy had several houses he would break into and stay in to get out of the elements. The best they were able to determine is that he would climb the columns supporting the porch roof, and then the columns unlock the attic window, and supporting the second floor balcony, and from the balcony roof he could climb in through the attic window. According to him, he would come down into the house when he was sure no one was home to steal food and sometimes use the bathroom. I'll never forget seeing him that night. I know it was him. It was exactly like it looked in the movies, but it was real. Me, 6 years old, awakens in my bed at midnight, staring out the door into the dark hallway, when all of a sudden, an even darker shadow zips by. That is a level beyond creepy. I mean, we have dreams, you read about sleep paralysis, you read about all these odd occurrences, but there was a literal human in your house. Yeah, I could see why that would stay with you your whole life. Whoa. I was 7 years old in the mid-'80s and was at my grandma's house being babysat. She received a phone call, and after a minute or two I heard her say, "Yeah, my grandson's here." And she then handed me the phone. I said, "Hello," and on the other end was the creepiest evil male voice ever that said, "I told her I wanted to talk to you about your shampoo, but that's not what I want to talk to you about at all. How old are you?" I answered, and then he said, "Excellent," drawing the word out like a movie villain. Even not really understanding the bizarreness of him lying to my grandma and talk to me, and then to my grandma actually giving me the phone. I immediately could sense the evil intent. I quickly gave the phone back to my grandma, but he hung up. I was terrified for days that a guy was going to find where I lived and kidnap me. I told my grandma and my parents what the guy said, but they brushed it off as a kid just being shy and easily frightened. They even teased me about it. As an adult, I realized that that behavior was pretty messed up, but I know what happened, and I will never ever forget that voice. I was sleeping in my room, which had an insanely creepy dark corner. One night I woke up to hear a very deep, growly breath coming from the corner, breathing in and out, in and out. I'm staring at the corner as the darkness gets bigger and bigger, and then boom, I wake up, only to hear that same deep, growly breath, breathing in and out, in and out. I was utterly frozen in fear until the loudly snoring pug, nestled between my legs, gave a twitch, and I realized where the noise was actually coming from. It still scares and relieves me to this day. I was about 13 and my brother was a couple years younger. We walked to the bowling alley one summer day when my parents were at work. A guy probably about 30 years old was by himself and wanted to be in the lane right next to ours. He kept trying to strike up a conversation, but we just mainly gave him short answers. When we were done, he asked where we were going. We told him we were going home and ordering a pizza. He then offered to drive us home and stop and get pizza on the way. We told him that we preferred to walk. We probably should have had the bowling alley manager call the police for protection, but we didn't think about it much until a few years later. This was about 30 years ago. I was 7 or 8. It was the 70s, and I was in the back seat of my mom's Nova, slouched down, playing with my Merlin. It was just the two of us. We were on a freeway heading into the big city when my mom's driving changed. She was speeding up and slowing down, tapping her brakes and changing lanes. She was making comments like, "Get away from me, bucko," etc. My mom then asked me to sit up so the driver of the other car could see me. She must have thought the other driver was harassing her, thinking she was alone. I sat up and immediately saw the car to the left of us. A man had his penis out and was playing with it. When the man saw me, he sped off. I was in shock at what I saw. Years later, I asked my mom about it, but she said she didn't know what I was talking about. I'm suspecting she realized she got him to leave her alone at the expense of exposing her daughter to adult indecent exposure. I was in a line at the cafeteria checkout getting a bottle of water and a candy bar to enjoy for the rest of the day. The guy in front of me was getting a plate of food. He didn't have enough money in his account, so the lady literally tried taking it out of his hand. I stopped him and said, "I'll pay for it." I put my account PIN in and picked up the scanner and scanned my candy bar and water because she was too stunned to do it and just kept saying, "It's fine, I'll pay for it. No kid should go hungry. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine." She punched in the right information and he just said, "Thank you." He just kind of looked at me like he had saved his puppy. He was probably 5'5" and 110 pounds. His knees and wrists reminded me of Holocaust photos. I'll never forget the sadness that washed over him as she tried to pull it out of his hands. He deflated faster than any balloon, but he didn't want to let go of the plate. I think about him maybe 4 times a week. I have no idea who he was, and I never saw him again. Before I was born, my mom was nursing my sister at home alone one dark evening. She looked out the window to see a man's face pressed against the window. She screamed and called my dad, who was down the street. My grandpa, dad, and another guy were there in minutes with guns, but didn't see him. I knew about this story as a kid, so when we started seeing grass and our flower bed pressed down in front windows, I was terrified. We all thought that was another Peeper. My bed was by the window, and my little legs and feet would have been visible from the outside. If he broke the window, he'd be able to reach right in and grab me. I started sleeping with my knees up to my chest. Eventually, my dad discovered that it was actually just a giant snapping turtle who liked to wander through the yard when we weren't looking. I remember seeing 3 grown men, the same 3 who chased away the Peeper, struggle to relocate this massive turtle without injuring themselves. I was relieved that the mystery was solved and the Peeper wasn't going to drag out through the window. It's been almost 30 years, and I still sleep with my knees up, just in case. My friend and I, about 13 years old, were walking to the Dairy Queen a few blocks away from our houses. 2 men, easily in their 40s, approached us and stopped to talk to us. I was wearing my dad's leather jacket at the time, and they commented on it. It had his name on it, so they literally touched the jacket where my dad's name was and asked if it was my name. I gave them a fake name. It just felt so creepy and gross at the time. My friend and I lied through our teeth with the questions they asked. Then we just kept walking. We never went to Dairy Queen. We started walking and then went to a very roundabout way back to my house. We never talked about it when we got back. I think we both knew we were in a scary situation that could have gone so much worse. Not my story, but my relatives, and we occasionally talk about it. I'll call her Em. Em's mother was a victim of a notorious serial killer couple. Her mom was the first known victim, but her body was never recovered. When Em was a child, she recalls her mom in a panic because they were being followed by a man and a woman in a car who attempted to lure them in. Em and her mom escaped and made it home. Police reports were made, but nothing came of it. Again, Em and her mom were followed by the creepy couple in their car. Another police report was made, but not acted upon. Shortly thereafter, Em was left alone in her house while her parents were out. She heard the front door open and footsteps on the stairs. She came out of her room and saw the woman from the car standing on the stairs. She asked Em if her mother was home, and she said no. The lady descended the stairs and left the house without saying anything else. A couple of days later, Em's mom went missing and was never seen again. After the serial killers were captured, their surviving victim gave a statement that the killers had told her about their many other victims and the trophies they kept. This led to the discovery of the truth about what happened to Em's mom, horrors unimaginable, though her remains were never found. One of the killers took his life shortly after, but his vile wife is still incarcerated today in the same town where Em lives. Em will never forget the day she was face to face with that evil woman on the stairs. Creepy, but not in a bad way. In 1979, my grandmother had a stroke, was partially paralyzed, and couldn't talk clearly. She went to a skilled care facility because my mom worked and we couldn't care for her at home. Some nights, the nurses at the facility told us they would hear her laughing and talking clearly, and when they went to her room and asked her who she had been talking to, she'd just say, "Angels." Well, her son, my uncle, was killed in a motorcycle accident in 1982. My mom took me with her to the facility to tell her about the fatality. When she got to her mother and started to explain, my grandmother said, "I know. She told me. He's all right now." My mom was upset. She thought a nurse had overstepped her bounds to tell my grandmother about the accident. She went to the nurse's station, and one of the nurses said she heard my grandmother talking. And when she looked in, there was a blonde woman in white sitting on the bed. And she might have told her. She said she just assumed it was a relative visiting. My mom said, "We don't have any blonde women in our family." My mom came back to my grandmother's room and asked, "Mama, who told you about Ralph?" She said, "The angel," and pointed to the window where we saw a flash of light. To this day, we can't explain it, but it brought my grandmother comfort in a terrible situation. One time my brother, his friend, and I were walking around these industrial buildings near home. The windows in one of the buildings were green and you couldn't see through them clearly, but you could see silhouettes. We saw this guy just yelling and screaming inside what looked like tables and jars and vials. We all thought it was a mad scientist doing experiments, so we ran away. A few years later, I rode past it on my bike, and the building looked abandoned. 2 weeks later, I walked by it with a friend. The building was gone. The land where it stood was covered in black ground, no debris. The trees that would have been behind the building had a bunch of large, ripped plastic sheets in them. But the weirdest thing was that it was hot as hell outside. But the whole blackened earth, once we stepped on it, felt like the air got colder. We laughed because we felt so uncomfortable and like we were being watched. When I was like 8 or 9, I was going to bed, but I was wide awake and couldn't sleep because of how quiet it was in my room. So I started scratching and making a beat on my mattress with my hands while I was lying down. And some hands from underneath my bed grabbed both my arms down and started digging their nails into my skin. I remember just being paralyzed in fear and staring at my ceiling, and the hands eventually let go of me and disappeared. I don't know if I was dreaming or having some sort of sleep paralysis, but I remember snapping out of being frozen in fear and running out of my room after that to tell my mom about it. And she told me that it was probably a nightmare from all the stupid things I probably watched on YouTube. She forced me to go back to bed, and the same night I had actually fallen asleep but woke up randomly. And like 3 seconds later, a single hand slid down from underneath my pillow and went down my back, and I was again paralyzed in fear. I left my mom's room and slept in the bathroom. LOL, I'll never forget. I told this to my parents, and they didn't believe me. I swear that whole situation led to me getting some pretty bad insomnia as a kid. Until 16 years old, I felt paranoid constantly at night.